If you've been on the internet at all recently, you've heard this phrase, the masculinity crisis. It's this huge, heated conversation that's happening everywhere, from social media and self-improvement channels all the way to academic circles. Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on with men.
And that really brings us to the big question we're trying to unpack in this explainer. Is this a real crisis? Are men actually falling behind? To figure that out, we have to look at what people are really talking about when they use that term.
This quote from the creator Cole Hastings just gets right to the heart of it. For a lot of guys, this isn't some abstract debate. It's a very personal feeling, a feeling of confusion, of not having a clear roadmap for how to be a man in today's world.
So, let's start by playing doctor for a minute. What's the diagnosis here? What are the symptoms? What's the actual data that people point to as proof that, yes, something is seriously off?
Well, a huge and honestly a tragic piece of the evidence is this number. 3 out of every 4 suicides are men. That is a staggering statistic, and it immediately tells you there's a deep-seated problem that's hitting men especially hard. And when we look a little closer at mental health, we start to see some really crucial differences.
And this really highlights a key part of the story. While women tend to report more mood disorders like anxiety and depression, men show much higher rates of substance use disorders. The sources point to a couple of huge risk factors for men. This pressure to be emotionally stoic, to just bottle it all up, and being way less likely to actually ask for help when they're struggling.
Okay, and you've probably heard about the loneliness epidemic, but the research shows it's actually a bit more complicated than you might think. While overall loneliness rates are pretty similar between men and women, one major study found that young men specifically report being more lonely than young women. This suggests it's a particular hurdle for them right as they're supposed to be building their lives.
All right, so we've looked at the symptoms, but to really get to the why behind all this, we've got to deconstruct the whole idea of masculinity itself. And to do that, we need to look at both its history and its psychology.
And here's the kicker. This anxiety about masculinity, it's not new at all. In fact, it's this theme that just keeps popping up throughout history. You had the ancient Romans worrying that peaceful times would create soft men. Then the Victorians freaked out that moving from farms to offices would make them weaker. And then, in post-war America, you saw this whole new redefinition of manhood. So this idea of a crisis seems to show up whenever society is going through a massive shift.
So what's the pressure that's always bubbling under the surface? Well, psychologists actually have a name for it: precarious manhood. And the core idea is this: while womanhood is often seen as a biological state, manhood is treated more like this fragile social status. It's something that's hard to earn, really easy to lose, and you have to constantly prove it to everyone all the time. And that leads to this sort of invisible rulebook. Rule number 1, you are on a constant treadmill to prove you're man enough. 2, that status is super fragile. You can lose it just by failing at something. 3, a lot of the time, being a man is just defined by not being feminine. And the research is pretty clear. Guys who really buy into these rules also tend to have more issues with aggression and their own mental health.
This anecdote from one of our sources, wow, it's just a gut punch. It perfectly captures how this whole pressure cooker gets started from a really young age. The boy fails, he looks for support, and instead he gets shame. He learns right then and there that his value as a man depends entirely on his performance. So after all that, the diagnosis, the deconstruction, where do we go from here? What's the path forward? That brings us to our last section, where we're going to explore some potential solutions and a new direction. First up, let's talk about strength. The old school model of mental strength was all about bottling things up, right? Never letting them see you sweat. The proposed update is a pretty big shift. It's toward emotional maturity. It's about understanding that real strength isn't about hiding your feelings, it's about knowing how to express them in a healthy way.
And it's a similar reevaluation for aggression. The sources draw a really sharp line between unhealthy aggression, which is all about domination and winning at someone else's expense, and healthy assertiveness, which is about being direct, honest, and confident, but while still respecting the needs of the people around you.
When you look at all the proposed solutions, they seem to fall into 2 main buckets. The first path is focused on big, systemic shifts, changes we can make as a whole society. And the second is all about individual upgrades, things men can do in their own lives. So on that systemic side, we're talking about things like parenting that teaches empathy instead of just stoicism. We're talking about schools that are actually aware of these social pressures on boys. And, really importantly, creating mental health services that are designed to be more approachable for men, like framing the conversation around burnout or stress instead of using words that might feel alienated.
And then you have the individual upgrades. This is all about personal accountability.
We're talking about the fundamentals, like improving physical health with good diet and exercise, quitting destructive habits, and maybe the most important one of all, taking the freedom to define what manhood actually means for you, instead of trying to cram yourself into some rigid, outdated box.
And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought from one of the sources. If an idea is constantly in crisis every single time society changes, is the problem really with society, or is it maybe time to fundamentally rethink the concept itself? That's a powerful question to end on.